I'm your host, Althea Provost. We have Stephen Strong, who is making the case that the original people, or the Aboriginal Indigenous people of Australia, were the first peoples. In this interview, we will explore their out-of-Africa theory, talk about star rocks, skulls unlike any other found on the planet, and more. Allow me to share Stephen and Evan Strong's theory. In consultation with elders of Australia, Stephen and Evan Strong have rediscovered a hidden history, the Out of Australia theory. The Strongs have written 6 books, Constructing a New World Map, Mary Magdalene's Dreaming, Forgotten Origin, Out of Australia, and Between a Rock and a Hard Place, that rewrite the history of Australia and the world. Their book's main brief is to prove through scientific fact what elders insist is true. The Strongs have assembled facts about archaeological finds and also early contact accounts, genetics, serpent myths, dreaming stories, Amerindian myths, parallels in religious texts, etc., into one coherent theory. Unlike the authorities in one field who are limited in their speciality, they draw all the disciplines together and attempt to resolve the confusion. Their claim is supported by genes, mitochondrial DNA, blood, and many experts that Australian original people set sail from Australia, not to 50,000 years ago. This father and son duo claim that Australian original people sailed to and settled in America over 40,000 years ago and visited many other places including Egypt, Japan, Africa, India, etc. The Strongs state that Australian original people were the first Homo sapiens who evolved before the sapiens of Africa and who gave the world art, axes, religion, marine technology, culture, cooperative living, language, and surgery. The debate over whether they were the first people in America is virtually a closed case, state the Strongs. Hundreds of bones and skulls have been discovered that are undeniably of Australian Aboriginal origin. What it all means has had the experts mystified. Professor Clive Gamble claims we have to construct a completely new map of the world and how it's peopled. The Strongs are responding to that call and attempting to clear up the confusion. They also trace the legacy of the Australian original dreaming found within the mystical sects and creeds. The Strongs believe its principal element are evident in all expressions, particularly Gnosticism. Welcome, Stephen, to InnerTV.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm not really sure what we can say after that. I think you just about summed it up nicely for us.
We're done. Well, I think we need to start with some rocks, some very sacred rocks. Could you share with our Starseed audience about star rocks?
We've got hundreds, and I'll stick to one at the moment because it sort of fits and ticks a lot of bills. There was a rock that was found about 10 years ago, and it was found 1.5 meters beneath the surface at a place called Carrion, which is sandstone on the top of a hill, and by that we had an assumed date of around 10,000 years. Now, the trick with this particular rock is that it has hundreds of lines and intersections and angles cut into the rock, and they're all straight. They weren't chiseled, they were cut. The rock is exceptionally hard, and if you were to go to a local hardware store, you would not find a tool that could mark it. Yet this rock is over 10,000 years old and has all these marks, including infills and stamps, that indicate massive heat and a huge array of technology. Now, as much as that is quite amazing, it's some of the follow-up work that really opens up some doors. Now, what we've been doing is we've been working quite closely with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Derek Cunningham, and his brief is to measure different caves throughout the world and the rocks and the lines they make and the angles to see if there's a pattern, which is what he does. And he contacted us and measured those rocks, and we thought that's quite amazing. And what we found interesting is, of all the angles found on these rocks, and there are many, the one that repeated itself the most was 33 degrees, which for those who know about masonry, they ring a bell. But what they may not know is this rock was found at Carrion, which is found at 33 degrees latitude.
That goes through Australia as well, correct?
Yeah, well, it sort of made our eyes listen and open up, and Dr. Derrick did some work. And he compared the angles that he found on Ross's Rock 1 to a rock that he found in the Calgary, which had 21 angles on it, of which 19 were found on Ross's Rock 1. And we thought, well, that's an interesting correlation. Would it continue? Well, it did. Soon after, Dr. Samir and Dr. Jock from the Bosnian Pyramid contacted us and said, we've got a rock we've found under a tunnel here which has all these angles and lines that intersect, and we wondered if there might be a correlation again. So we sent that off to Dr. Derrick, and lo and behold, of the 15 angles found on those rocks, all 15 are found on Ross's Rock 1. Now we're starting to pick up a pattern. And then we went further. Recently we got a rock from Germany which has 10 angles on it, and all 10 of those angles can be found on the Australian rock. So you put that together. You have Bosnia, Calgary, Germany, 51 angles and intersection points, and of them 49 can be found on an Australian rock. What does that lead us to think? What the elders told us, that there was a first language that was spoken around the world that we hear about with the Tower of Babel, where everyone could openly and honestly communicate, and then that fell apart. And that seemed to be what we were picking up there. But then we went a little bit further, and this is where it does get quite odd, twice over. We then did some more research and found that if you look at the original street map of Washington, D.C., and look at the two faces that we've got, they are identical. Now, we don't put that up in our books. We save that for our presentations for an obvious reason, and we put the maps up, and every time you hear these gasps, like, my God, what is going on here? So, there you have what I would call the technological background, but I need to complete this story by giving you the original background to this particular rock. Now, for years that we had this rock, my main boss, Karno, who's passed on, and I can't use his last name, never spoke to me about the rocks at all. And then one day he rung me up, and he said, that rock you've got, you need to know the story. And I was told the story, and it made so much sense. He told me that way back in the very beginning, when the Pleiadians came here the first time, in the form of the goanna, which is their totem, they came here, and they came to the Earth, and they came to Australia because they wanted to mix breed. They wanted to share their genes, but they wanted to do this by consent, not oppression. Well, the original people wouldn't be part of it. The crow and the eagle fought against the goanna, and the Pleiadians could not get in. And this went on for months, and then finally the crow realized the wisdom of what the Pleiadians offered and changed sides. And soon after that battle was complete, the Pleiadians came, and the eagle that fought to the finish had to give something as a memento and as proof of the battle, and he gave him the claws. And Karno then said to me, those claws were taken, and then they were scratched into this rock, and you white fellas have a story about the 10 Commandments, but it comes from here. So that very briefly is the original story that goes with this particular rock, and the technology we found that's associated with it. When you put it together, it's a new version of history. And we've got plenty of other rocks, but that's a good aperitif and taster as to what sort of things these rocks actually mean.
I find that there's layers and levels to their symbology, to their mythology, and so we could say that the claws or the sky people, the bird tribe, fought against maybe the starry brethren. You know, so it's like you can start to see how they're using these metaphors to say, you know, there was other wisdom here on this planet to keep this planet cohesive as it was, but then to bring the light, or we could bring the Pleiadian light, the Christus light, into the planet, that there was some negotiations, if not a fight.
There was, and I think people need to understand that sometimes we become overwhelmed by the fact that our star brothers and sisters have greater technology. But what needs to be understood in this story was the Pleiadians sought out the original people because they had talents and wisdom that they didn't have. This was supposed to be the merging of the best from above and the best from below to make something that further on in the piece, which is now blossoming now, would redeem this planet and all the others that are locked into it. So there was a master plan, and it was between equals. Sometimes we get a bit carried away and place the Pleiadians at a level above when it should be a level of equality.
Well, I agree with you. So let's turn to some of these scratches on these rocks. I'm curious because when we met on October 8th of 2016, and carry on, in fact, through this evolution that you were going through, did these other rocks, so Bosnia and Germany, Calgary, have three-sided markings?
Well, some did and some didn't. What's interesting is, I mean, that varied, but what I find quite fascinating, when we talk about angles, I've got to make out that Dr. Derek was measuring 6.32. These were the measurements we were getting. So we weren't getting, oh, you've got 16 degrees and we've got 16 degrees. No, it was 16.31 or something twice over. So there's a real exactness in the markings. Now, the rock in Calgary is three-dimensional. The one in Bosnia was two-dimensional, and so was the one in Germany. And the one we've got is obviously three-dimensional. What we found is it's not so much the shape of the rock, but the type of script. And there are many different types of script. And the ones that's precise, where there's angles that you can measure, that is what we call the star language that comes from the Pleiadians and others. Now, there are other types of script we've seen on these rocks which are not Pleiadian and are from here. And again, when we talk about this story, we always try and remind people two races, the highest there were in the cosmos, joined together for a master plan that we're only just beginning to understand. So it's more to do with not so much the shape of the rock, but the type of writing and inscription that makes the difference. And I do remember the elders saying that we'd been looking for these rocks for 50 years, and we call them the Star Rocks Collection. And those rocks, the ones with the sharp angles, we call them all part of the Star Rocks Collection because our elders told us where it came from.
So we're looking at, they're pointing to the Pleiades, the Orion, the Southern Cross, if I remember from our time together. You also mentioned that they had 7-star languages, that there's a masculine and a feminine.
Yes, there is.
Could you share more on that?
Well, I wish I could, but then that would mean that I've got information from the feminine side, which I'm only getting bits of. The bits that I do know now is that these rocks, and some people aren't happy when I say this, but I have to tell the truth, were taken off nearly all the men 400 years ago because too many men had misused these rocks for bad magic and were given to the women. So when the whites came here, most of these rocks were no longer being used but minded by the women. Some of those rocks, and I know some particularly, are women's rocks. A great majority of men's rocks, and then there's some we're not sure about. That sort of knowledge, to an extent, unfortunately, is close to gone. There may be still some elders who have it, and we have some information that was given to us. We're hoping one day to put them in a portal and learn a lot more. But for now, I have to say that is all a work in motion because there's still many more coming in. And we have psychics now that are picking up the load and channeling what Karno and others have said, and we're getting information like that. But it's a gradual process, and I can assure you what we're doing, the scientists don't really respect because we talk about words like magic, and that really puts their hackles up.
It's not proven. It takes them back into the aboriginal reality, the dream time, where we are really working with synesthesia. And, in fact, this is how I came to you and the rocks and carry on in Australia, was in dream time I was shown by the Pleiadians that there was an ET area that I needed to go to 50 miles or so from Sydney, and they pointed it out to me in dream time. They also gave me some images. And lo and behold, when I went to Gosford Glyphs, the image, or you would call it the portal, that's kind of melted into the ground, I had already seen in my third eye. So they were already taking me through this story, having me awaken to the story. And then in terms of your naughty rocks and what maybe, old Aboriginal or whoever has done whatever, to these rocks, because essentially we're just talking, they are rocks, that have been shifted or changed or made into something more. But when I was in Copacabana, as I was coming over to a house that I'd been to meet Nina, who was our guide at the time, before I left Copacabana, I started getting nauseous and started to feel a certain unease that I hadn't had before while in Australia. And as I drove along the coastal ridge to get over to you, it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I saw myself reaching for a rock, and I thought, oh my God, didn't know that you were the carrier of these evil rocks. So I was already picking up on my bio unit, my human body was picking up on the power that was instilled in these stones.
Yeah, well, it's still there, and it's multiplied many times over since then. And it's an interesting setup. As the Schumann resonance picks up on this planet, so too do the rocks lift themselves up to higher vibrations, but they don't come back down. So they become more problematic and more, they can heal people, and they can also, and I'm going to be very honest about that, some of these rocks can kill. That's
they'll take you
what
out.
They carried with you when they came. And now the great majority of them want to be part of this evolution. And some, of course, just like humans and other beings on this planet today, will fight that evolution to the finish, and we sort of deal with that too. So that's part of the deal with that, and of course scientific, and that keeps the scientists happy, but as soon as we talk about the esoteric, we lose them all.
Everybody has to choose their evolution based on their current mindset or current evolution within their own cellular structure. So
that's exactly
you can present the information, but until they have walked an earnest walk or walked along the esoteric lines, the blurring between the dimensions, they won't have an idea what you're saying. And for my own part, I have to thank you for showing me, not the evil rocks, we didn't go there, that wasn't part of my purpose, but so forever thankful that it showed me my weakness and at the same time showed me my strength, because when you know who you are, what you are, it helps you stand strong on what you're choosing. And so
that's actually what the rocks do when they're in ceremony. When people actually are doing full ceremony, they ask what's going to happen. I tell them I have no idea because it's between you and the rocks. I said, what will come out of it is you'll know more about yourself, and they'll teach you. And they look at me like, well, how will that happen? I said, well, you just sit there and see what happens. And each person who sat with the rocks has come away different and changed and realized there's things there that the rocks will point out and say that needs to be fixed and things that don't need to be. So your reaction is normal.
Well, actually, when I arrived and I got out of the car and I said, is my name on this? Whatever this energy is my name on it? And I heard no, and I said, good. That's why I said to you, take those rocks, I'm out of here. And so it's like that evolution of the spirit. But at the same time, I was so extremely thankful. But I do want to bring this back to these rocks. Now, the ones that you have are chert, correct? And they were melted, weren't they?
Yeah, what they are, there's a combination. What actually takes place is there's a base rock, and I know roughly of where the machine is, but I can't say more than that. There was a machine that would take chert and resin and melt it at around about 1,900 degrees Celsius, and then lays a coat on top of the actual base rock, which can then be cut into while it's wet, or if need be, when it's dry. And it depends. They've done it both ways. So it's a combination of the base rock, which has a storage of information, then a coat on top that gives you a different set of information, and the two together, like you said earlier, with original storage, you get it bit by bit. The two together will give you the full information. So it is really two different things at once and been melted together.
Is the coating a silica-based coating like the
Aboriginals? Oh, yeah.
I had a feeling. Now here's, because the Mayan created timber kilns and, cut down their forests, which kind of led to, things going wrong for them when the dry season came. But they melted limestone into cement. at 14,000 Celsius. So here we are with the Aboriginals doing, the same thing. They're taking, they're melting silica, which is, basically crystalline, and putting it onto this chert rock. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I also point out to people to just remember, computers came out of the silicon chip. Don't think we're that clever that we just discovered it then. We knew about it way back, and that's why they chose silica, because it can store information, which is what it does.
Well, the Chert Mountains in Arkansas, are really looking at the uplift from two colliding things, but there's chert and silica, and that area is like off the chart.
That would be deadly. Man, that would be strong.
Yeah, I know. You need to go there. When you have a crystalline lake, so you have water, you have the largest continuous quartz crystal bed running underneath the lake, plus the Chert Mountain, that's crystalline based. You have all these crystals, and they're the most crystalline clear quartz points on the planet. It is. I can only just imagine what it'd be like. Yeah. Yeah, it's intense. So now I want to get back to that map of Washington, D.C., because I remember you talking about an obelisk. So why do you think Washington, D.C.? I have my own opinions, but why? Well, I know that the forefathers believed in aliens, and I also know for a fact that the obelisk was actually erected on the day that the Pleiades appeared on their horizon, and it was meant to commemorate that day. So it's no surprise that Ros's Rock 1 has within it one massive inset that has metal inside it, and that's 10,000 years old, ladies and gentlemen, so that doesn't fit in again. And it is in exactly the same place the obelisk was. My belief was that the patterning on that rock, Ros's Rock 1, is a sacred pattern that had been handed down to generations throughout the world and was kept as sacred. And when the founding fathers in America, and they tried to do this properly, they did base it around their knowledge, because Washington and Benjamin Franklin openly believed in aliens. They took that map, which was sacred, and worked around it. And in 1848, when the obelisk went up, people put it up and they said it's Independence Day. No, it's Pleiadian Day. And that basically, if you look at where our obelisk is, it's in exactly the same place. So we believe there was a global first language where trust and belief and honesty was reigned supreme. And then interference took place, and we started to speak different languages, and we lost all those things, and look at the mess we're in today. So we sort of feel like that map is legitimate in every way possible, and it certainly does get a great reaction when we put it up. But it also tells us a lot about the intentions of the founding fathers in America, which was entirely honorable. So don't forget that part of this story. And as we know, the closest people that lived the way the original people lived were the people in America. And remember, the last two cultures that lost this were in America and Australia. They hung on to the old way of living the longest, so we should never forget those will be the countries that will start again. I'd also like to say that they paid for it, too. Oh, yeah. in a hard way. I was at Standing Rock, and I'm like, they're still paying for it. Oh, man, it's the same everywhere. I mean, this is the point. The ones that hold this knowledge the longest, like the American Indians and the Australian original people, they had to pay more for their knowledge than the others did because they gave it up earlier, and the suffering was intense. But we know, we have a prophecy, and I don't know if you might have the same, but we had a prophecy that they would come for a while and we would learn from them, and then their time would finish. And our prophecy says their time is finishing now. I'd like to share a little bit about that. I was invited to meet a 120-year-old Kogi, an Arhuaco, a Wiwa. I didn't meet the Kankuamos because they lost their way. They're the four legs of the table, according to the Kogi cosmology. And they obviously believe they're from the Pleiades, period. Yeah. Point taken. They still live in the old way. Well, from what they shared was that this is really a stance that all of us must take. You either are on board with the earth or you're not. Exactly. And it's period. There's no wavering. I asked him about the middle way because in, the spiritual community, it's all about sacred neutrality. And so I asked. I said, give me your opinion on this. And they said, that's a cop-out.
Yeah, you got to make a choice now. It's no good just sitting on the fence anymore. Everyone has to say yes or no. It can't be in between. I agree with them. They're right.
And I'll take you to something that the Standing Rock people that had gathered said. They said we're the first in and we're the last to leave.
Good.
So there we are. I mean, we're here. But I want to go back to those divining rods, cyclones. Do you think the silcons? Do you think that those were used to melt the rock? I'm just curious.
No, I think they were used in a different way, and I can draw on a parallel that took place in Tibet in 1939. Well, it was the last recorded thing that took place before the Second World War, where all these monks came out with the long sort of didgeridoos that they play, and they held rocks. Now, this was recorded by quite a few people, and what they told the people there is, see that mountain up there where there's a dozen monks, that's where we're going to put the monastery in. And they looked at the gap and thought, well, how is this going to take place? Well, then what happened was they came out and they started playing drums and they played their didge, and then the monks, held these cylindrical rocks and held them above the rock and then started to lift them. And once they lifted, they flew across the valley and landed where the monks were standing. And this took place for a day and a half. At the end of the day and a half, the monastery had been built, yet nobody had actually picked a rock up. Now, we're of the opinion those rocks, which they call silcons, which is cylindrical cones, the same ones that were used in the castle, were what the original people used to pick up massive weights. Now, there are different types of silcons that will have other magic, but the longer ones we've got, the ones that sing and have the same sort of resonance Michael Tellinger has, those ones are for lifting up massive weights and moving around, which we've seen constantly in Australia. Then there are other silcons, smaller ones, that will have different magic. But the larger ones were always stored in one part of Australia only because that's the energy line for them. We believe the larger ones for lifting weights, the smaller ones had other magical properties. And between them, they basically had all the technology we need today, but we can't access because we have to pollute and burn and do all sorts of horrible things.
So essentially you're saying that through sound technology, so probably entering into the dream time through sound technology, they were imprinting the rocks, because I sent you a picture of one in Colombia that I was granted to share, and that thing's carved. They call it the cosmic brain. And I have to tell you, I looked at that and I'm thinking, my God, how are they shaping these massive boulders?
With sound, like you've just said. Remember, the Bible starts in the beginning was the Word, not the light. So it is sound. Sound is the creator. And you're right, what they were doing. And, of course, remember, what I'm talking about in Australia, we share with the rest of the world. So when you talk about other countries doing the same thing, this is when we're all one nation, and there wasn't any of the crap we're going through now. So, and during those times, everything was shared. There was nothing that was coveted because everyone had it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, walked into Kogi land or whatever, and I said, let me guess, right behind this rock's all the script. Here's the Stargate. It was like if Australia didn't prep me for it, I wouldn't have, known what I was doing, so I really appreciate that. Now, you honestly believe, or let's say Frederick Slater believed that the original people, did they come from Egypt?
No, he thought the Egyptians came and learnt from the original people, but he didn't know for sure because his work was done in 1939. He knew there was a long contact with Egyptians, but he also said the Egyptians learnt from the original people, their language, their mathematics, and their cosmology. So he knew that, but he didn't know the complete basis. But he also said in one of his papers that Bayami, who is our creation spirit, came from the stars, and his wife Mullumbimby was never born from the earth, but born of the stars. And one of his sons, the nameless one, despaired of the earth and got in this tree that mingled with the clouds, and when it took off, flames come from beneath, and it went to the Southern Cross. It is a story about Pleiadians coming, some staying and some leaving, and he put that up in 1939. Well, I've got to tell you, in 1939, you don't put things like that up and expect to continue with an academic career. It gets smashed. So, yes, he spoke about all those things. He also spoke about the fact the first gods came here and gave us the sacred means of propagating life, and he wrote that in 1939. Those sort of things written then do not get you brownie points after the Second World War, and we never heard from him again. But yes, he did understand, because he got a rendition of the first language from someone else that was given to him, and it was made in 1830 by a woman who won the trust of a tribe, and we know her full story. So basically, he had a manual that told us about the first gods, the sky heroes, and come from the stars, and he just read from it.
But he also discovered that mound that's towards Mount Warning, correct?
Yes, he did, yeah.
It was always there. He brought it more to light and during his time, correct?
He did, and he did for about 9 months, until the Australian government went to the farmer and told him they were going to take his farm off unless he destroyed it, which they did the next day. But during those 9 months, he did bring them to the world's attention, and fortunately, days before the mound was destroyed, it was completely charted, and we have that map, and we have the name of each rock, and we know where the rocks go, and we know what they mean. They don't have that at Stonehenge, and at Stonehenge, it tells us where the sun comes up and the moon comes down. At this particular place, I remember reading one of his letters to the person on site. We said, remember Petrie and Carter, your job is far greater, because you're dealing with the beginning of humanity and the beginning of all languages. And he went on to say that those guys are doing nothing compared to what you're on about. So he understood the site, and so did the Australian government, and that's why it was destroyed. And to this day, is still here. Yeah, he did get it.
It's basically going through a land grab, correct?
At the moment, the current proposal is that particular site, which is 100 acres plus another 400 acres, is going to be clumped together, and the council are approving the development and building of 450 houses on those sites, and if they do that, the site will be destroyed forever. That's the current legal situation with a standing stone site in Australia. Now, if this was in Europe, my God, it wouldn't have happened. And if it was anywhere else in the world but Australia, it wouldn't happen. But in our country, we don't care about that. We've got the notes, we've got all the records and all the original people saying it's sacred. But right now, it was never gazetted as a sacred site, so therefore it's just called land. Got a lovely view, overlooks the valley. You could put a lovely set of maybe 30 houses on the standing stone mound, all have great views, and everyone there would die.
Indigenous people all around the world are really having to fight to get their lands back to hold sacred ceremony, to keep the vibration, the balance here on the planet, and to keep the ley lines flowing and the acupuncture points doing their thing. And it's happening globally. They're raising money. Yeah. They're doing their things just to keep their land, intact. I've traveled and I've gone to sacred sites that have a street going through it, and they're almost dead sites. Yeah, you have a stone there, but they're not acting properly the way they were meant to.
No, well, that's just the way it is at the moment. And, of course, it's worse than it's ever been, which is to be expected, because they know if we can, the Indigenous people, if we can sing this earth back again, they lose control, and that's why it's become quite desperate recently, and we're sort of used to it. We expect it.
Right. Yeah. So I do want to move on to the fact that you have a skull found unlike any found on the planet. Go ahead and give a bit about that.
It's sort of like a combination of what's been taking place with us for quite some time. We've came on to 4 skulls, and I won't go through all of them now because it'll be too difficult, and we'll probably need an hour to do that. But what I will do is I'll talk about the last one I have at the moment. It's found in 1953. It's been wandering basically with one person for about 60 years, then someone else, and the academic got it. Took it to the Australian government, they looked at it and said it's normal, and then made his life hell, and he contacted us and gave it to us. Now, very simply, I'll explain the problems with this skull. Number 1, all humans have what's called a forehead. I'm sure you've got one. Runs above your eyebrows. We've all got one, haven't we? Now, to begin with, hominids didn't have much of a forehead like Lucy and others because they were just growing a brain, and it was around about 400, 500 cc. Well, this particular being has a cranium capacity of about 1700 cc, but has no forehead, none whatsoever. It's actually not. When you get to the eyebrows, to the eyes, there's nothing. If you look face to face, eye to eye, you will see no forehead. But you will see 17 by 12 centimetres of skull running backwards, and actually running backwards at 200, 210, 220 degrees and sloping behind the eyebrow ridge. Now, that is not like any hominid on the planet. The rule is a small forehead, 600 cc, and then it gets higher and higher, and here we are today, 1400 cc. You don't go back hundreds of thousands of years and find something where there's no forehead, but it's got a bigger brain than us today. Now, the problem with this being, and I don't call it a hominin, and I don't call it a Homo sapien, and I've put it in front of experts who will not call it either too, and they gag when they say this, but I can't say more than that now. The problem with this being is as threefold. Number one, it has the largest eyes of any hominid ever found. Right? Now, that's an issue, a big issue, because here we have a massive brain, which is not going forward but backwards, which means the genetics is completely different, and we have the biggest eyes ever seen. In fact, one archaeologist says it was made for an other, darker environment. You could not take this out in the sun. You wouldn't. You go blind. You wouldn't. It's just too much. The second problem is with this particular being, not so much the one I've got now, but the one we worked on in a skull site, is we took out the humerus of a very similar type to this one. And instead of 30 centimetres, which is what you have and I have, I measured 42, and I hadn't got to the elbow joint. And I thought to myself, well, that's a little bit different, because normally, and I checked gibbons, 35, nothing goes to 40. Not even 8-foot people go to 40, but this thing, by the way, had a femur exactly the same as mine in length, and I figured, it's 5'10". Then I get this thing out, and the weird part is you've got to put another arm on after that, then you've got to put the hand on. This arm is going to be over 1 metre in length, but the thickest part of the bone was 1 centimetre. Now, I'm looking at this scientifically, I'm saying, whoa, hang on. You mean nature has created the longest limb ever on this planet and made the bone so damn thin, well, what ligaments and muscles could you put on it? Which the answer is bugger all, if any. What use would this arm be on a planet that has the gravity we have? And the answer is none. It wouldn't work. Now, if I halve the gravity, well, then now I can put more ligament and muscle on it. It'll function more. And if I halve the gravity and darken the place, then I have something that fits what we found. There's some of the small problems we have with this particular being. Now, I can't go into details because everyone in Australia, I have about 5 different government agencies that want to put me in jail for these skulls. I've got letters, and I've been threatened on the phone, through email, everywhere, on a daily basis. No one will discuss the skulls. They will not discuss how they look, but they will discuss the legalities of how we came upon it. And by the way, we are covered. But they will not talk about this because they don't want to. Now, the only archaeologists that we've seen, and they want to work with an international team, and we'll see if that happens. I'm not convinced because the thing's so damn unusual. So what we found, and it wanted to be found, is we found 2 of these to begin with. And then we found the second set. Now, the second set, what's also unusual, in fact, never heard of before in the world, is in the first set, we found a being with a skull sloping back, not quite as strong as this one, and it had about a little knob you could see if you looked at it. And then it was accompanied by another being, which was weirder, because it was one skull with no sutures. Now, all hominids have sutures. That's how babies get that cap at the top that defuses, and that's how we get bigger brains. Well, if it never had the suture, it can't be a hominid. Well, this doesn't. And we've looked at this many times, and it doesn't. And what's interesting is the skull thickness is twice as thick as the other being, and they're buried 1 metre apart. Unheard of. Completely different beings. And only in Australia, we're only supposed to have Homo sapiens, and none of them are that, next to one another. Then the new burial. Lo and behold, we've got the one I just spoke about. It next to it is something that's probably Denisovan, that's got a skull thickness of 13 mils, and the other one's 6. It's got a huge slope on it. It's got a massive brain of about 800 cc. Nothing like the first one again. Both of them thicker skulled, but nothing like the other ones. And in both cases, I can tell you there's no parallel on the planet for burying beings so different to one another, so close.
On the first one, was it found in Central Australia? I get that.
Both were. But
okay,
the beauty of them is, what they were going to say is mutation, mutation, mutation. And I'm thinking mutation when you get smarter, maybe not. But when you find two different beings with the same receding forehead, and they're hundreds of kilometres apart, you can't use the word mutation anymore. You must use the word species. But the problem is, I have a species whose eyes are too big for the sunlight, that can't handle gravity, and was buried here. And I keep thinking to myself, when they do genetic analysis, they're going to find there's genes in there that aren't found on this planet. And the reason is you have to look up. Now, we're 95% sure of this, and we have taken it to a scientist who just stood there with their mouth open saying, I've never seen that before anywhere. And I'm saying to him, but hang on, this is found in Australia. It's only Homo sapiens. He said, well, it's not a Homo sapien. And then this guy said to me, how are you going to measure this? And I said, with carbon-14. He said, throw it away. I said, why is that? He said, because that date goes back hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And I said to this guy, do you realize what you're saying? I know what paper you wrote. And he said, yeah, I know what I'm saying. He said, but that's the answer. So what we have is an opinion. We've run it through scientists who've agreed. Now, whether they're going to come to the party and do the rest of it, I don't know. I hope they will, because that will make it impossible to deny. But to me, I can tell you that the elders have already told me what we're looking at, and they told me that we're looking at the sons of Biami. And if I remember before, I told you Biami was our sky hero that came from the sky and brought other beings with them. I believe that we found a Pleiadian in Australia, and that is why the government have so many levels that have threatened to put me in jail. They've told me how much they're going to fine me and how many years I'm going to be doing, and why the academics have turned on us en masse is because there's a truth here that proves that we're not what we think, which is earthly vandals, but galactic citizens. And once we start thinking like that, maybe humans will get a head around why this particular being turned up now. So that's very briefly what we've stumbled on.
It's delicious. So I want to ask you, since you've been knee-deep into this and you're presenting information and you're getting burned by it, and you're really carrying a flame that is very difficult to ignite and keep going, do you have any advice to starseeds? My whole work is working with starseeds. These are people who are waking up. They're aware that they came from Pleiades or elsewhere. What's your advice for them?
Absolutely, and it's a good one to close on. Very simply, the reason that these beings have been found is because they want, and I've had psychics look at it and said there's a spirit still in that one, not the accompanying one, but the one that looks like it's come from the Pleiades. The reason is because we've been told by the elders there's an awakening that's taking place right now as we speak, and they were called, and I'm going to be very cryptic here because I'm not allowed to say everything, but they were called and they are coming. And our time now, and I know many people that are doing this right now, is all we've got to do is prepare for the time that they come. Now, I'm told when they come, it won't be on that day, oh my God, now I want to join the team now, man. I didn't realize, but now I want to be part of the team. That's too late. They come after the event. Decisions have to be made before they come. When they come, all I can say is, I've been told where, I've been told when and how many. What they do is they'll land above a sacred site in Australia. They won't touch it. And then they will call for the resonance of a certain number of people of good intent. And if that number is reached, which I can't say, and I believe it will be, they then can take the energy, that positive energy, throw it into our most sacred site, which is Uluru, in the middle, and that will activate a trip line that will set off all of our ley lines in Australia. And once that happens, it then spreads around the world like a spider web. And that then creates, as the elders put it to me, and I think it's a good way to close because I'm going to be cryptic about this because you did say the elders were cryptic. It then creates what they tell me are two realities that come into play at the same time. And I do remember at the time, the first time I heard about this, I asked for more and I got nothing. And I'll close with one thing I was told later on in the piece, because I still can't understand fully what they meant by that. But it came with a caveat from an elder who rang me recently, and he said, you know those two realities? I said, yeah. I said, I know about that, but I don't know what you mean. He said, you just remember one thing. He said, it's mathematically impossible for two realities to coexist for a long period of time. He said, one must wither and die. I said, yeah, okay, I get that. And I said, well, yeah, but that still gives them the chance, doesn't it? The ones who make the wrong choice. And this is the part I want to close with. He said, no, it doesn't. He said, for the first time ever, some souls will be extinguished. So, for those people you're dealing with that are thinking, is there something in this? From an original viewpoint, I'm going to say, well, I've been told this so often now. I'm a scientist, and I started a high level of skeptical doubt. And when I first heard this the first time, I was sitting at 40%. I thought, this is a bit different. I've had these same phone calls from so many different people confirming the same thing. I've gone from 40 to 85%, and I don't think I can get higher than that. I'm now of the opinion, as much as I've heard this story about there's a change coming, and we've heard it, oh, God, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, I always thought, yeah, right, okay, time you can't do. What I've been told this time, I only spoke to someone yesterday about the same story again, is that this time it is coming. And the time for people to make a change and to make a decision is nearly all but gone. So those who are thinking, why am I doing this? Just hang in there. My understanding is it'll get worse. Believe me, there'll be more false flags. There'll be shit flying around everywhere in the next few months because they're desperate. The mob that are holding this place know there's a change coming, and the only way they can stop the change is that everybody is so fearful when they come, there's no resonance to work off. That's the only way they can stop this. So the time is coming close, I believe. And if it doesn't, I'll carry on irrespectively. But for those people who think that they have a Pleiadian contact, well, right now, you probably do. And I would grab it and hold on to it, because in times to come, it may be the ticket to ride.
In closing, if you'd like to know more about Stephen and Evan Strong, their website is linked below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more InnerTV interviews. Thank you, Steve.
My pleasure.
An amazing exchange, and I appreciate it deeply.
No worries. Enjoy.
Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.